Welcome to the Professional Diploma in Web Development. If you've always had a keen interest in full-stack web development, then you've come to the right place. This course has been designed for both beginners as well as experienced web developers who seek a practical approach to web development. In this course, we learn all the fundamentals of web development and learn to code from scratch. We'll begin by installing and exploring our scripting environment, after which we'll move on to programming languages of the web. Now, this includes HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and even PHP. We'll cover both front-end and back-end technology stacks. Throughout the course, we'll develop a bunch of interactive web applications that you can add to your profile to strengthen your credibility as a full-stack web developer. From responsive e-commerce applications, style booking systems, and even HR systems, rest assured that this will be a hands-on course. As a bonus, you will also learn all about SQL databases and how to integrate them into your website. In our final lesson, we'll be gearing towards bringing everything together. This includes everything we have covered in CSS as well as HTML. We'll develop a single page application as part of this major project, and we'll be using animations, positioning, padding, margins, you name it. The goal is to develop a basic front-end web page for an e-commerce grocery store. So put on your creativity hats, because this is going to be an exciting project. Now, as mentioned before, in today's lesson, we are going to be covering HTML and CSS as a project for lesson 8. Now, before we get started, let's have a look at the objectives for today's session. Now, in today's session, you'll be surprised that we only really have one objective, and that's developing our first major website. Now, given that it's only going to be a single page application, we are going to be taking every single concept that we've learned in HTML as well as CSS, and we are going to be applying it in today's session. Now, before we get started, let's have a look at the tip of the day. Now, the tip of the day is a pretty important one, and the point that I want to bring across here is that when using code or when writing code, it's important that we always reuse code where applicable. Okay, as software developers, there's no point in writing the same couple of lines of code out over and over and over when you can just copy and paste them and refactor the code according to what it is that you're trying to achieve. And that is something we'll be doing in today's project. With that being said, let's dive into our very first and only topic for the day, developing our first major website. So without further ado, let's code. So essentially what we'll be developing is this application, the single page application for this grocery store called Dash Groceries. And let's just reload it, and we'll see we've got a bit of animation on our title over here. We've got some animation on our social media links on our right hand side, as well as for our contact form, which consists of 3 fields. A first name, last name, as well as a subject field with a submit button. And then we've got this thing called popular categories for the various categories of our Dash grocery store. This includes daily dairy products, cold meats, as well as fruit and veg. Okay, and again, this also comes with a bit of transition. Now, nothing necessarily happens when we click on these. Okay, and then we'll also be working on a navigation bar style like this. Now, we've never worked with a navigation bar where we've styled it according to what a modern standard navigation bar would look like. So this is going to be a first time for a lot of these things. And for the most part, this session is going to be based entirely on this tutorial because it is a ton of code. Okay, so bear with me, because when you come out of all of this, CSS and HTML is going to make a lot more sense, which is why I've decided to compile this major project for the last lesson of this module. So without further ado, let's dive in. Now, to get started, as we already know, we need to go up and boot Atom. Okay, and then the first thing I'll do is I'll click on File, and then I'll create a new file, and I'll save this as my index.html file, my entry point to my application or my website. And I'll say save as. Also, I just want to take note that we do have resources, or I have resources that I will be working with in this tutorial or this practical. However, I cannot share this with you, unfortunately, because these items are copyright. Okay, so keep that in mind. I do suggest maybe having a look on the internet, finding a couple of repositories that offer you royalty-free images that you can use in place of what I'll be using for this tutorial. Okay, now let's move on. So the next thing I want to go and do is I want to create that index.html file. Okay, I'll say save, and I'll just type in HTML, and then I've got my boilerplate template over here. Okay, so moving on, I now need to start typing out my code. Okay, So I don't necessarily need this. This I can keep, which is my head tag. I'll space out the body tag slightly over here. I'll space it out at the bottom further. And then for my title, I'm just going to hit and add dash grow series. Okay, which is quite important because this is going to be the title of my website. Now, after I've given my website a title, I can go ahead and add my link to my CSS, but let's save that for after we've completed the HTML code. So for the first part of this tutorial, we are going to be working strictly with HTML, and then we'll move on to other things such as creating our CSS document. Okay, so below this, I'll just space that up because later on I will add that link in. And then in my head tag over here, I don't necessarily need anything else. I'll just jump right into working with the body tag. Okay, so in my body tag, the first thing I want to do is create a div container. And remember, div container is just an empty container. And I'm going to call this nav dash, let's just correct this, nav dash wrapper. Okay, so this is my wrapper. I want you to think of this as the wrapper that surrounds my navigation bar. Okay, and it's going to hold my navigation bar intact. And below this, I will add a nav element, and in between this, I will add my unordered list, and then my unordered list consists out of several list items. Okay, and with each list item, we are going to have a item for each part in our navigation bar. The first one, I'm just going to give it a class over here. I'll say class nav list nav. Actually, I need to include in my ordered list, my unordered list elements. So let's just remove this for a second. And in my unordered list over here, I'm going to give it a class because remember, I'm going to style this later on. And I'll say nav dash list. Let's save that. And I've got my first list item. Okay. And over here, I'm just going to say, let's actually create 4 of this because we need 4 of them according to what we have in the demonstration I showed you. So let's copy and paste this 4 times. And over here, I'm going to call this one home. The next one, I will give it a name of login, not login, login. And then this one over here, order online. Let's actually make it capitals, okay? Online. I'm sorry, my new keyboard is extremely sensitive, so I have to push down a little harder on these keys just to break it in nicely. So we've got 4, we've got home, login, and unordered list. Okay, and remember, I need to create anchor tags for these as well. So for the first one, I will create an href. What I also want to do maybe is just create a class for this because I will be working with this later. So for the first list item, the home list item, I'm going to give it a class of nav item for the time being. I'll save that. Now I need to go ahead and also add in that anchor tag, if you remember correctly. But now the issue is when it comes to the anchor tag, I might need to just alter my list slightly. So let's actually go ahead and tackle that. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll actually remove this over here and I'll say a anchor tag and I'll add that home in here. Okay, I will do the same. Actually, this href I also need to change because this page does exist. This is our index page or our landing page. So whenever we click on this link, we are going to make sure we're loading index.html. Okay, I'll save that. Over here, I'll just remove this and I'll create another anchor tag over here and I'll just paste that login over here. I'll remove this as well, cut anchor tag, paste that in here. Remember, we're doing this so we can give it that effect that we have a link, even though these are dead links. Just we can denote that by seeing the hashtag over here. They are dead links. And then one last one over here, and then I'll add that in here, about us, and we've got everything seems to be perfect so far. Now let's actually have a look at what we have so far in total for our code. Okay, so I'll just navigate to where all that content is. Just close all of these up, we don't need these. I'll load this index page. Okay, so we've got a home, we've got order online, login, as well as about us. Okay, so I'll close this off, minimize. Now we can start working on our code again. Now that I've got my navigation system in place inside of a div container, I can continue with other things such as creating additional content. Now you'll notice that in the demo that we had this image that would load. Okay, maybe I should actually open up that tutorial with you guys and we can work through it nicely together. So let's just quickly find it so that it all makes sense. Okay, so this image over here, this background image, we want to add that into our system over here. Okay, because currently we've got a navigation bar, which is all good and well. Let's actually keep this open as a point of reference as we move throughout this tutorial. Now the next thing I want to go and do is I want to go and add that image. So to do that, I need to create another div container. Remember, if you don't know what a div container is, again, it's just an empty invisible container that you can't really see. And I'm going to give this one a class of image dash holder. Okay, and then between that div, I'm going to create an image, and it's asking me for the source. And if we remember correctly, that source is sitting, let's just navigate back to that. That image source is sitting inside of our image folder. So remember, in our last lesson, or one of our previous lessons, we spoke about referencing our paths correctly. So we need to now go and sort of add that path in here. Okay, so inside of that we had, let's actually give this a, so the source over here will be images, just add the S, and that image is called bg-image.jpg. Keep in mind, we must always add the .jpg. Okay, we'll save that, and then we can give this a class because I am going to be manipulating this later on. So this image class is going to be set to background dash image. You can call it whatever you want as long as you reference these correctly. So save that. Alt, we don't need this because this image is not going to break. I can 100% guarantee that. Let's save and see what we have so far. Okay, so if we navigate back and we open up this page, we can actually see that we've got this image placed nicely over here. Okay, so what we can also do is we can actually go and increase the width of this image, so which is exactly what I'm going to do now. So what I'll say is, for that image, I'm going to make sure it has a width of 100% so that it scales nicely to the viewport. So width 100%. Remember, 100% or percentage is just one unit of measure that we can opt for, and we opt for this specifically because we want responsive designs. Okay, so let's go and open this up, refresh. Oh, that's the completed website. Refresh, and all seems to be working well. You'll also notice that I no longer that slider. Okay, if I remove the 100% over here, let's just cut this out for a second, save that. If I navigate back to my browser over here and I refresh, I've got the slider, which I don't necessarily want. I want the image to scale to the viewport, okay, without having to do any sort of sliding. And to do that, again, we just add in the 100% attribute over here. Great stuff. So moving on, let's just get back. So we're kind of making headway, and I think it's not that bad. It didn't actually take us that long. And the next thing after our image, what we might want to do is we want to add a h1 tags, which denotes that we have this thing called popular categories inside of our website. Okay, and for that I need to go and add another div tag, and inside of this div tag we're going to add quite a bit of content. Or what we could do is we could also separate it out if we wanted to. So maybe we should take that approach because it's going to be a bit more lean. So I'll say h1, and inside of here I'll say popular categories. Popular categories. Did I get that right? Yep, I did. And then I'll add a horizontal line break at the bottom of that. Just turn my caps lock off. There we go. And inside of this I'll give it a width. Just correct this. A width of 1300. We can add pixels if we want to, but let's just use the shorthand for now. Let's head back over, refresh, and see what we have so far. So I've got popular categories, but it's sort of hanging to the side. Now, in our previous lesson, we did learn all about positioning. So we'll position this at a later stage when we start with our CSS. Okay. For now, I just want to get the skeleton in place for our web page or our single page application. Great stuff. Now, what we can also do is add some sort of caption under here. Remember, we had that transitional animation effect, And I'm going to add an h1 tag over here, just so that we can have that drop down effect of our title that we had in the example that I showed you. So I'm going to give this an ID first of all, because it's going to be the only title that drops down. And I will give it an ID, not idea. So ID equals, let's just type this from scratch. ID equals caption -1. Okay. And I'm going to give this, I'm going to make it, let's add caps lock, and I'll just copy and paste what I already have. So this caption is essentially just going to say something like grocery shopping done online. Okay, let's save that. Have a look at what we have so far. And we won't be able to see it now because it's sitting right at the bottom of here. And again, this is something we'll style at a later stage. Okay, remember, HTML works in a semantic fashion, which means every element that we create is going to be the preceding or the succeeding element of the other. And then after we've included that, we've got our div tag over here. It's closed off. Now I'm going to move on and create another div container for our featured wrapper. Okay, and I'll explain in a second what this is. So after this HR that we included, I'm going to say div, just get the caps lock off, div, and I'm going to give this a class of featured dash wrapper. Okay, and inside of this, I'm going to create another div container. Now, the nice thing about div containers is that we can create div containers within div containers within div containers. Okay, quite important to keep in mind as well. So what I'm going to say here is I'm going to say div, and I'm going to give this a class of product dash container. Okay, and then the line below that, I'll just add a paragraph tag. And in this paragraph tag, I'm going to give it a class. Okay, remember I'm adding all these classes and things because later on I'm going to be styling them, and I'll just say cat text, which implies category text, and I'll say dairy products, and then I'll save that. And below this, I'll add a source image, okay, because I want that dairy image to display. Well, our dairy products is sort of going to be housed in this category. So then I'll say image, I'll say source. I've got the source already. So then the only thing I need to do is say images because it's in the images folder. And then I'll say dairy.png because that's the name of the file. And then save that. And then just below this, I've got that button as well. So I want to include that button. Okay. But before I even do that, what I could also do is I could house that button in its own div container just to separate it from the image so we can style it accordingly. So I'm going to say div. I'm going to say btn container. Now, because we are going to style our buttons accordingly, this is why we're giving it a class. Okay. And then I'm going to say, type. Actually, we have to get out of the quotation marks, and then I'll say type equals button. Oh, this autocode can be annoying sometimes. Type, just cut this, add my quotation marks in, and I'll say button. So it's a type of button, and the name of this button is just button. So I'll say button, and then I will add autocomplete. So name outside and to escape the quotation marks, and then inside of here, what I'll say is view more. I've got button. So what I could also do essentially is I could give this a type of button. So what I can do here is instead of having it just wrapped in this one container, I can remove this entirely. So let's just grab all of this code over here, remove it. So I've got the div container, which opens here, closes here. And inside here, I'm going to say button, and the type is button, the name is button, and I'm just going to say view more, deactivate my caps lock, and then class of this button is going to be view dash more dash button. Okay, wonderful. Let's load our code up and see that everything is working out just fine. So I've got my div container here, checking sure I've got everything. So it closes off here, and inside that div container, I've got another one. This one over here, I've got another one. Okay, so everything seems to be working out just fine. So I'm going to have several buttons inside of the featured wrapper div container that I created. So I can actually space this out so I can see what I'm actually doing. Let's save that. Let's reboot or refresh. And there we go. I've got a view more button. I've got my image and I've got the dairy products category that I've included as well. Wonderful stuff. Now let's continue with our code. So after I've created that product category or that container specifically, I can now go ahead and create additional ones. Okay. And we had 3 over here. So I'm going to, maybe I could just copy and paste all of this. This would just be a lot easier. Okay. So if I copy and paste all of that, it's just going to, let's go over here. If I copy and paste this, it's just going to expedite our process. So we don't have to type everything from scratch. Okay, so this category over here is going to be our, let's just double check, it's going to be our cold meat category. Then we have to make another copy and paste for our fruit and veg category. Great. So what we can do is we have the class product container we can keep as standard. We can keep the cat text as standard because that's a class. The source image I'm going to change to fruit. What do we have? Fruit dash veg .png. Alt text we can keep as is, and then the view more button we can keep as is as well. So let's save that. Let's go back into our code or to our browser, and now we've got our dairy products category. Okay, we also just need to change this because this should be fruit and veg. Okay, so navigate back, and I'm going to say fruit and veg. So this over here I'll change to fruit and veg. Wonderful. Okay, so we've got one category over here, we've got another category over here. Now I need to go ahead and create one more category. Okay, and to do this, let's just make sure my code's working out just fine. So I've got my featured wrapper, which in somewhere at the bottom over here, I've got my div container over here. I might be missing just one line of code, and that is the div container. So I've got my div here, I've got the div here, which closes that. This one closes that one. I need one more div container, it seems. Okay, because we need to close this one off, and currently this one does not have a closing div tag. So I can just add another one at the bottom over here and say div. Actually, we can just type this one out manually. So this one will be close off div and angular brace and save. Okay, wonderful. So it looks like we are making sufficient progress so far. Now we can essentially move on to our very final product, which is going to, let's take it from here maybe. So we've got div. I just want to make sure all our div containers are correct. So we've got our featured wrapper, which takes in all the categories. We've got this one. This one closes off at the bottom though. This one closes off correctly. So we can actually move one of these, to be honest with you, because we don't need them for the time being. Let's just save this, see what we come out with. There we go. That's a lot better. That actually looks a lot cleaner. Now, when we copy this, we need to take the div container from here because it opens over here and it closes over there. So we can copy and paste this again. Let's just give it a bit of space, and let's just space that out. Let's make sure everything is working correctly again. So div opens and closes at the bottom. We'll add the next one shortly. We've got this one over here. We've got this closing, opening. This one over here might need another div container. Let's just add that here. So div. Let's remove this because we only need the closing tag. Save it up. There we go. So div closes off, and this one closes off as well. Wonderful stuff. So our div containers seem to be working perfectly fine. Okay. And then we need to reformat this. So we had, it was called meat products, I believe. So let's navigate back. So we've got cold meat. Actually, cold meat was supposed to be the second one. Interesting. We don't need to necessarily worry about that too much because the order isn't all that important. And what I can do is I can just say meat products. And then I will reference a different image over here. And that image is going to be, what is the name of this image? Cold meat. So let's say cold dash meat. Save that. And then we also need to change, we've already changed this, we can actually just call this one cold meat just to be consistent with our with our image that we are embedding here. So cold meat, save that, refresh and see what we have so far. So we've got cold meat, fruit and veg, and lastly we've got dairy products. So if we want to make sure that our website is uniform according to this, we can actually just reformat our code. What we can do is we can take the fruit and veg category, cut that out and paste it after this div over here. Okay, so we'll save that. Now I'm just going to beautify this. There's this package called Beautify in Atom, and it's something I think I should most likely introduce you to because it's quite useful for formatting your code. So if you head over to File and you go to Settings, and at the bottom over here, Install, what you can type is just Beautify. Let's see what we have. It's not picking it up. Just correct this quickly. Let's try this again. So File, under our settings pane, Install, just type out Beautify again. Still not picking up. Let's close settings. It might just be a bug in Atom. So File, Settings, Install, and again you can just type in the word Beautify over here, and it should be the result by, I'm just checking, I should have it installed, Atom Beautify by Glavin001. Okay, now this allows you to format your code so that it looks a lot more like human readable code. Okay, and then once you've installed it, you simply just click the install button. Once you've installed it, you can navigate to Atom Beautify under packages, click on Beautify, and it's going to format your code and make it look a lot more presentable. Okay, some spaces you might just have to clean up. What I do want to draw your attention to is that our div containers over here. So all of this over here is essentially the content that we created for our categories. Okay, so we should have a opening tag for the one div container. Inside of that we have another div container, and this closes off that whole div container. Okay, so you should have 4 div containers for each category. The same applies to this one over here as well as this one over here, and this closing div container over here is the closing container or the closing element to our opening element over here at the top. So keep that in mind as we progress through this lesson. Wonderful. Now that we've sort of laid out the skeleton of our website, we can start adding the social media links in as well. So to do this, after our final div container over here, I'm simply just going to say div class, or we'll call this one an ID. We'll give this one an ID because this will be the only div container that has social media links. So ID, let's click the correct one, and I'll say social dash media dash container, and then I will give this a background color. I just want to make the background color transparent, and the hex code for that is hashtag 00000, which is essentially just 5 zeros. Okay, save that up. So we've got our opening and we've got a closing div container over here. Let's open up. And then I'm going to create each individual social media icon with an ID. So in here, let's give it a bit of space. So div, now we've got our div container specifically for our Facebook icon. Okay, so let's remove this and rename it to an ID. And in here, I'm going to say Facebook icon dash container. Okay, and that's going to be the ID specific to this div container over here. And then after this, I will create a, let's see, maybe I should actually just include the image. So I'm going to say image, and I'm going to say the source of this image is embedded in images slash icons slash Facebook dash icon dot png, and we can keep it as is. We don't need an alt over here, it's just alternative. So let's make sure all of this is working correctly before we progress. So let's refresh, and our icon is not visible at all, which is okay because it's transparent. How do we know that? Because if we navigate to the folder where our images and icons are located over here, you'll see we have icons, and you'll see the background is black, right? But you'll see the icon itself is white. So which means we won't be able to see the image on our website just yet until we style it. And that's okay, because when we get to it, we'll sort all of that out. Also, I just want to make a reference to our path that we have over here. Remember, we are referencing the image folder. Inside the image folder, we have our icons, just in case you're wondering where I'm grabbing those icons from. Okay, so don't be alarmed if it's not popping up on your website immediately. What we can also do now is we can copy and paste this several times, because we have 3 icons. We have Instagram, Facebook, as well as Twitter, I believe it is. Let's paste this over here, and I'll change this ID over here to Twitter icon container. So we'll say Twitter icon container, and then the image we're referencing here is Twitter icon PNG. Twitter icon PNG. And again, how do we know that? Because inside of our icons folder, this is where I'm referencing those images. If we click on these, what we can also see is the details of what type of images is, okay, which is a PNG file. We are used to working with JPEG files. In this instance, we are working with PNG files. Why? Because you want that transparency effect. So I'll copy and paste this for our last icon, which is going to be our Instagram icon. Okay, so I'll just say Insta icon container, and then the image here is going to be Insta icon. The path remains the same, keep that in mind. Okay, so just, did I change anything? Insta icon, save that, and let's refresh. We still shouldn't see any images pop up, which is absolutely fine. Ah, there we go. You can actually see it right at the bottom over here. I don't know if you can see this little if, but that's our Facebook image. Below this, we have our Insta and our Twitter icons as well. Okay, so everything is coming together nicely. Wonderful stuff. So after we've created this div container for all our social media tags, we can now move on to creating our form, which is sort of the final part of our HTML code. Okay, so I'm going to add a break tag after this div container. Okay, so I'll say break, and then I'm going to create another div container. It's all about div containers so that we can house our content properly, and I'm going to give this one a class of form-container. I'll save that up, and then I'm going to add another div class inside of this. Okay, and this is just going to house the image and the paragraph for our container, for our form. Okay, if you notice over here, we've got this image and we've got this contact us paragraph tag. So let's just hop into that and include that inside of our code. So inside of this div tag, what I'm going to do is create another div tag, and I'm going to give this one a class of form dash head dash container. Okay, I'll save that up, and then inside of here I want to add that image, that envelope image. So I'll say image, and the source of this is going to be images dash email dash icon or slash icon, and this is also PNG image. PNG, we don't need an alt, so I'll keep that as is. What I will do is I will associate an ID with this. Okay, so we can actually remove this and add the ID in the beginning over here. So ID, and the ID here is going to be email dash icon. Okay, let's see if the code is correctly. So we've got images, email, icon, and that's it. So now we need to add our paragraph tag, which basically specifies the contact us label. So I'll give this one an ID as well, and I'll say ID, and the ID here is contact us dash label. Okay, and then in between I want to add the paragraph that's actually going to be housed in this element, which is contact us. Save that up, and let's see what we have so far. So if I refresh this now, we should not be able to see anything, which is still fine. There we go. Okay, so we've got our envelope and we've got contact us. Now remember, we're going to format all of this using CSS at a later stage in this lesson. Okay, so after we've created that div container, which is this one over here, and the form contact, which is this one over here, I now need to go and add the actual form to my web page. So that's going to be done after the div container, where I created the envelope and my contact us label, which is this one over here. So let's just clean this up, And what I'll do is I'll say form. I'll give this form, I don't need a class for this form. What I can do is I can keep the action. The action is not something we're going to be working with yet. You can actually leave it as action PHP or action underscore page. Let's actually maybe just get and remove this because we don't need this for now. The method we also don't need, so we can take that out. And then what I need to do is I need to start adding the labels for my form. Okay, so I need to say label. And this is, the label here is just what is the actual field name of this form. Okay, so under the for, I'm going to say if name. We're not necessarily going to be using this either. I'll give this label a class. And the class I'm going to say is form item, because we have multiple of these. We are going to be formatting this in CSS. I'm going to keep them as form item, keeping in mind consistency. Okay, so form item first name. Let's actually just type that in here. First name. Let's save that up. And then I'm going to add an input for this label. Now the label is just the text associated with an input. Okay, so input. And it's going to be of type text. I'm going to give it an ID. An ID. And I'm going to call this ID if name. Okay. I'm going to give this one a name of first name. And then maybe a placeholder. Okay, so we'll add a placeholder. Now remember, placeholder just signifies to the user what kind of information we want in this particular form. And here I will say your name and keep it as that. Okay, so I'll save that up. Let's hit back over, see what we have so far. And we have our form at the bottom. And again, all of this does not look appealing at all. It looks like a mess, right? But we will be cleaning it up pretty soon. And now we've got this label. Now we need two more. So I'm going to add two break tags over here so we can space them out nicely. Right? And I want you to take note of what I'm going to do here now. I'm going to copy this. Okay. And this I'm just going to alter much like I did with my category section earlier. Okay. Because there's no point in rewriting the same code from scratch when I can just copy and paste. Okay. So let's clean this up. We can leave a space over there. Form item, we'll keep it as the class name because it is a class after all. We can say this label is going to be last name. And then the ID, we will say al name. We'll also say the for is al name. Okay. And then what else do we need to change? The name, we can change this to last name over here. So last name. And then the placeholder, your last name. And then we've got our break tag, so that should be fine. Let's just make sure everything is working out correctly. So ID is different, name is different, placeholder is different, the form item is perfect. Lovely. So let's go ahead and refresh. So now I've got a form with two fields. Great. So hit back over to our code. Now we have one more thing that we need to include, which is that subject area where the user types in what they want their query to sort of be. Okay, so I'm going to copy this again. Okay, I'll just space it out. Now here it's going to be slightly different. Okay, because instead of a text input field, we are going to be using a different kind of input field. Okay, so just bear with me for a second. So this is going to be the same for the most part. The label, the class, the for we will change to subject. This over here will change to the subject that the user would like to type into the website. Okay. And then the input, we are not going to have as input. Okay. We're going to call this a text area. And I'll explain in a second why we are doing this. So text area. And we don't need a type for this. So we can actually remove the type. And we can maintain an ID of subject. So we'll say subject. We'll have the name as subject as well. Subject. And the placeholder we'll have as how can we help? How can we help? Okay. And we also need to close this off with a text area closing of brackets. So I'll just angular brace, close it off, text area, and then close it off over here. Let's make sure everything is perfect. Wonderful. Save that up, see what we have so far. And now we've got this text area, and this is the thing about the text area, you can expand it. Okay, a text area takes in a lot more characters than things like first name and last name, email addresses, username, or whatever the case is. The idea behind a text area is to allow the user to type in a lot more characters than what they're used to, and it's also scalable. As you can see over here, we can't do that with things like our normal input fields. Hence, we are using the text area. Okay, there's one more thing we need to include here, which is our input field for our submit button. And to do that, we can head back over to our code, and below this break tag over here, I'm just going to add input, and this is going to be a submit button. Okay, and the value here will be submit, and then the name, we don't need a name, we can add an ID in here. Let's say ID, and the ID is going to be submit -btn. Okay, refresh and see what we have so far. Wonderful. So we've got our form at the bottom with our image hovering here at the top. Okay, what we can also go and do is we can actually add a bit of commenting in here if we'd like to. Okay, I'm not necessarily going to do that. What I'm going to do though is just beautify my text so that it looks a lot more readable. You'll see it just pops a little better when you look at it from a visual perspective. Okay, so what have we done so far in our HTML code? We've created a navigation system. Okay, we've added the image with that title or that caption. We've added the popular categories heading. We've added the horizontal break. We've added a feature wrapper, which starts at the top, ends at the bottom, and then we've added 3 of these categories. Okay, so what we could do is maybe just add a comment in here, and we'll say here is that this, let's type it in, this is the dairy copy, and yeah, let's just say this is the dairy cat. It's the dairy categories. And if you want to comment something out, I hope this works in Atomy as well. What you can do is you can hold down Control and the slash button. It should automatically, the /, and it should automatically just comment that out for you. Okay, so I'll just copy this, and then this starts at this tag, ends at this one. So then we can add this here. This is the cold meats category. Cold meat category. And then let's just change this to, let's maintain consistency. Let's say category and not categories. I'll copy this one over here, and then this one opens up there, closes off there, and I'll just paste this in here, and I'll say this is the, what was the final one? Fruit and veg. This is the fruit and veg category. Okay, and then we can also add something here. Maybe this is the social media links section. Save it again. Always save consistently. And then one more. This is the holder. This is the holder for the form. Wonderful. Now we've commented on our code, so we know what's going on. And I do want to remind you that it's important to comment on your code because other developers will be looking at your code. So it's quite important that you signify to them the certain sections in your code. Now the next thing we need to go and do is work on our CSS, which is probably going to take slightly longer, but it's going to be worth it when we have a really beautiful and animated web page. So now that we've completed all our HTML code, we can officially move on to creating our CSS file. And to do this, we simply create a new file, and we will save this file in a folder called CSS. Okay, so I'll say save as, and then in my sandbox, in the same directory as where my images are sitting, I will create a new folder, and I will call this folder CSS. And inside of this, I will go ahead and save that file, and I'll just call it style sheet.css. Let's make sure everything is correct. Style sheet.css, lovely stuff. And then I want to link the style sheet up, but okay, before we even get to that, I maybe just want to play around with my figures. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my body element, which is the entire body of my website, and I'm going to set the margin to auto so that it auto adjusts nicely. Okay, auto is just an alternative to using pixels and those kind of things. So if I refresh my website now, everything should be working just fine. We don't see any visual difference just yet. So to do this, what we can also do is we can maybe edit our nav wrapper. Now, if you remember correctly, our nav wrapper is this thing that holds together our navigation system that we have in place over here in this div container. Okay, so I'm just going to say, and that is a class, if I remember correctly, so I'll say nav dash wrapper, and I'll open it up here, give it some space. I'll give it a background color of hashtag 00B300, and let's refresh and see if we have any official changes. Not yet. Okay, we'll continue to, we still need to link up our style sheet. That's also why. Okay, so to link up our style sheet, remember we have to add that to the header over here. So what I need to do is I need to add a link, not a list, a link element. So over here I'm going to say the relationship is that it's a style sheet and it's sitting in the same folder as where my index is sitting, and it's called style sheet instead of master. Okay, that's the file that I just created now. So style sheet, save. Let's see if we have any changes. Lovely. So we've got this green effect in the back over here now. So we know my style sheet is officially communicating with my HTML code. So I'm going to make the other changes that I need to add for this nav wrapper, and I'm going to add a padding value of 5 pixels. So padding 5 px. I'm going to add a width of 100%, so it spans right across the screen. Okay, just like we did with our image previously. Let's save, make sure the changes are still working correctly. There we go. So it's spanned out nice, and you'll see we have padding in that direction over here to that side, as well as at the bottom over here. And now the next thing I want to do is I want to make this sticky. So if I scroll, for example, the nav bar needs to remain in my vision and essentially have an anchor point which should be on top. Okay, and to do this, if you remember correctly, based on our previous lesson, we need to first give it a position. We need to call the position attribute, and we need to say that the position here is sticky. Apart from this, we want the top placement. We need to specify these things as well to be at 0, so it's not necessarily going to move. And there's this new thing called Z index. Now Z index basically means you want this to be the foreground or the most forward placing object in my website. So keep in mind, we can have layers. So when I set my Z index to 1, my nav wrapper is going to be the most front placed object in my website. Okay, just in case you have a bit of issue when you create your nav wrapper. Okay, so if I scroll down now, you'll see my navigation system remains in my view and only anchors to the top. It stays at the top. This is different from fixed. Keep that in mind. Okay, so the next thing I want to go and do is I want to sort of work on my nav list. So I'm going to say nav list, and in my nav list I want to add a couple of attributes like list style. I'm going to set the disks to none. You'll notice that I still have those disks. I want that to be invisible, if you will. I'm going to add padding, and I'm going to say the padding is 0. We could put pixels, we don't have to. I'm going to say the display should be flex. Okay, remember we talked about block elements, inline elements. These are the two basic ones. We also have this thing called flex, which allows you to sort of design a responsive navigation bar. Okay, so I'm going to add flex as my display type. Then I'm going to add align items, and I want the items to be stretched across as opposed to being underneath each other. I'm going to justify the content as well, and I want the content to have this attribute called space around, so that it's equally spaced. Each link needs to be equally spaced, if you will. And then the width here I'm going to set to 100% as well. So width 100%, save that, head back over, and there we go. Now we've got this neatly laid out navigation bar, which looks a lot better than what we are used to. Okay, and we can move on and we can design a couple other things as well. So the next thing I want to do is work on my nav list, but then the items. Okay, the list items inside my nav list. So I'm going to say nav dash list. Just delete that. The list items is what I'm targeting now, and not so much the nav list. Okay, and in here I'm going to set the display to inline. I want the margin to be set to 0 pixels. I'll save that up, head back over, and everything still seems neatly laid out. But what you'll notice is this effect is only going to take place once we do our hovering and those kind of things as well. Okay, so you won't always see visual changes as I create the code as we move along. Now the next thing I want to do is work on the nav list item anchor tag. So again, dot nav dash list. Now I'm targeting the li, but inside of the li tags or the list items, I'm targeting the anchor tag. So this is going to be a pseudo class, and I want this to have some sort of visual change on hover. Okay, this is quite important because as we hover over these links, there needs to be some sort of differentiation as we hover over every single link inside of our navigation bar. And I'm going to say the background color here needs to be, let's go with chartreuse. That's a great color. We can actually just say dark orange. Let's go with dark orange. Dark orange. Change that up. Let's see what we have so far. And if I hover over this now, I should get some sort of transition. You'll see I have this visual effect that indicates to me I'm hovering over a certain item. Wonderful stuff. So moving on, I'm going to do the exact same thing with hover, but instead of hover, when it's active, when a link is active, because I'm changing the hover state to active state, I want it to be a different color, which is going to be chartreuse. Okay, so just copy and paste this over from my existing code. I'll save that up, refresh. We might not get a immediate, there we go. So you'll see once I click down, that means it's active. Okay, it's got this orange color, and if I click here, orange as well, same thing, same thing. Okay, so heading back over to my code. Now when it's visited, I also wanted to have a different color, so I'll just copy and paste this again. So when I've visited this link, wrong area. So when I visited a link, I want the color to be dark violet. So I'll just go ahead and change this, dark violet. Save that up, get back over, refresh, and there we can see this is the only one. Okay, all of them have been visited. So when hovering over them, because they've been visited, they're now purple instead of that orange color we had previously. Next, I want to move on and work on my navigation items. Okay, and to change that color, what I can do is I can say dot nav dash item. I want the color, okay, which is not the same as text color. I want the color Alice blue. Okay, let's refresh and see what we have so far. Now the nav item, let's just actually have a look and see under our HTML code what the navigation items were. So our nav items were essentially, or it was just this one that we gave a nav item, just the home we gave a nav item. Okay, so you won't necessarily see visual differences across all of them. So that's what happens. Okay, if I click down, it changes to a different color, and same thing here and all of those things. Lovely stuff. So moving on, back to my style sheet. I want to start working on my form, because the form here takes quite a bit of time, and you'll notice that if we look at what we have in our output at the moment, the form as it is extremely, well, not much appealing to the end user. Okay, so I want to change it up, and I'm going to say dot form dash container, and I want to edit this with a couple of attributes, and the first one is the background color of my form is going to be a color of hash 323232. Close that off, and I want the width to be slightly smaller at 330 pixels. Let's actually see what we have so far. There we go. So it's coming together nicely, and the only reason it's being pushed up so far above here is because of this image over here. Okay, this image is causing a bit of a issue with our code. So what I can do is I can add a border. I can order border top radius, top left radius, just to smoothen things out. Border, let's see, do we have it over here? It should be somewhere. Here we go. Border top left radius and top right radius is going to be changed. So I'll just copy this, copy, and I want them each to be 10 pixels. So the left hand side at the top and the right hand side at the top needs to be changed with a border radius of 10 pixels. And now you'll see that it's slightly more smoothened out over here. Okay, the other side is not going to be working yet. Let me just see, there might be something wrong with the code. It's the top left, I need to change this to right. Change this to right, here we go. And I've got smoother edges for the top of our form. Okay, it just creates a more clean design, if you will. And then the next thing I want to go and do is I want to add in my position. So I want this form to remain fixed in my website. You'll see that it's currently, as I scroll, it disappears. Okay, I want it to remain fixed in the website. To do that, I need to use the positioning again. So position, I'm going to say is fixed, and the bottom, and this is something we haven't covered yet, but you can use negative values in CSS as well. You don't always have to use positive values when you're specifying things like your pixels. So I'm going to say the bottom, it needs to be positioned at the bottom by 280. Okay, and let's save that, see where we are so far. Always save, refresh, and have a look and see what you have. Okay, currently it's not popping, it's not showing, that's okay. That might be an issue with my index.html file. What you'll notice is that sometimes things become a bit buggy and you have to remove your HTML wording over here because you've already specified it here as an opening tag and a closing tag at the bottom. So with a doc type, it sometimes throws things out. It can be a bug with Atom specifically, I'm not entirely sure. I'll save that, see if it makes any changes. There we go, so we've got it back in our view. Okay, so now you'll see it's fixed. Okay, it's not moving at all. Okay, so it stays at the bottom no matter what, and that's exactly what we want. That's the effect that we want. So moving on, let's actually change this to pixels and make sure we get the same output at the end of the day. So I save that exactly the same. So you don't always have to specify pixels. The reason being because with web design, it treats everything by default with pixels. So I also want to position this to the right hand side. Okay, so I'll say 0, and then I want this to transition. Now transition isn't something we've worked with before, but transition allows us to, it's similar to animations but not as intense. There's actually a lot more you can do with transitions as opposed to animations. The two are used for different reasons, okay? And that's something we'll get to in at a later stage when we create more intense practicals. And I want to set the transition time here to 0.5 seconds. Okay, I'll save that. Let's refresh. So you'll see it just fades in nicely. Okay, it just fades in. If I remove the transition, nothing's going to happen. So I just want that fading effect. Again, it just makes for a more clean design. Next, I want to work on the hover. What happens when I hover over my container? Okay, that's another thing that I want to work on here. So my form container, below my form container, I'm going to add a hover state for this form container. Form container, hover. When hovering over this, I want the bottom to be 0. Okay, let's save that, see what we have so far. Not refreshing, not working either. Form container, let me just make sure I've got my code correct here. So the bottom is set to 0. Oh yes, I need to work on some of the other things for my form container as well. So just bear with me for a second. Let's just clean up the code over here. Okay, so let's also remove the pixels in case that causes an issue later on down the line. Still remains stagnant. We'll move on in the meantime. So I also want to work on that email icon, because remember that email icon is pushing everything out, so it's not allowing the form to behave in the way that it's supposed to be working. Okay, so email dash icon, and if you're wondering what this is the image in our HTML code over here. So let's just see if we can find that quickly. Over here, email icon, that's the image that we're referencing. We're now going to scale that image down. Okay, so we're going to give that image a width of only 50 pixels because it's going to be really small, and we want to float this image to the left hand side. Okay, so float it to the left. You remember, float allows us to place something either to the right or the left of the screen. Okay, so if I refresh now, there we go. This is being floated. We just have to position everything once again correctly. So I've got my float left. Let's just give it a bit of space over here. That's correct, that's correct. And now we need to work on the head of the container as well. Okay, so I'm going to say Oh, we also need to work on the form item, but that's something we'll get to at a later stage. So form dash head dash container. Just make sure I got my spelling right, else things are just not going to work. If we do need to debug this at a later stage, we'll do it. But let's just get all the code out of the way in the meantime. Hashtag 000, this is a color, okay? And then the padding, now you might be wondering, what is this that I'm actually working on? I'll show you in a second. The form head container is everything that houses the label as well as the paragraph tag, the contact us as well as the image, okay? And then padding, after padding, I might just want to give it a border radius of, I'll actually copy and paste this over here. Okay, this is just to make sure we don't have some sort of overlapping elements where we created a round radius, but now it becomes sharp at a later stage. And then the margin bottom. Margin. Now when we say margin bottom, we are only targeting the bottom margin of this element. I want it to be 10 pixels. Save that up. Head back over. And still we are not getting our form. Again, this is something we will fix shortly when we debug our application. And then the next thing I want to work on is, let's see what else. So form container is done. We've worked on the image icon. We set the width to 50 pixels. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to work on the form items, okay, which is the fields inside of our form. So dot form dash item, open up a parentheses, and then I'm going to say margin left. Set this to 15 pixels, and the color is going to be white, and our padding left is going to be 8 pixels. Save that. We still shouldn't be seeing our form, that's okay. So we've got our Facebook elements over here. Our only thing that's missing is essentially our form, okay? And then we'll work on the subject, the contact us label, and the submit button, which is going to be sort of the last couple of things of our form, okay? So to do this, what we can do is, if we navigate back over here, form item, we need to add a subject. So our subject, one of the fields in our form, was a ID. Okay, that's why we're using the hashtag. So subject, I want the height to be 100 pixels. I want the width to be 200 pixels. And then moving on, we can work on the contact us label. So contact us dash label. I want this to be color of white. Okay. And then the submit button is going to be sort of the last thing in our form. So the submit button, submit dash btn, that's the button in our form, keep that in mind, okay, is going to be a background color of hashtag 4CAF50 AF50, close that off, and then we don't want a border around it, so we can say border none to remove the border. We can change the color to white. We can add padding of 7 pixels as well as 12 pixels. Okay, so 7 and 12, two different values, just means top and bottom, left and right. Okay, this is the shorthand as opposed to having, say, padding left 7 pixels, padding right 7 pixels, padding top 12 pixels, padding bottom 12 pixels. So this is just a shorthand property for that. And we're going to do the same with the margin over here, where we set our margin to 9 pixels and 18 pixels. Let's save. Let's see what we have so far. And there's our form. Our form is now appeared. So you'll see that if I hover over this, our form actually transitions nicely in and outwards to our scene. Okay, and that padding and margin we added was just around here for the submit button. We're not complete, we're not done with our submit button yet. So let's actually work on some text alignment as well. So text align, let's see what our text looks like. So if we hover over this, it's actually aligned quite nicely, to be honest with you. But just for the sake of keeping everything nice and clear, we'll make sure our text is centered. Okay, and then text decoration, I'm going to say none. Okay, moving on, my display, I'm going to send to inline block. My cursor, when hovering over it, is I want it to be a pointer. So let's see what it looks like now. It's kind of just a normal cursor. So my cursor, when hovering over that button, should be a pointer. So, and I'm going to say pointer. Save that. I wonder if pointer is the default. Pointer is the default, it seems. Let's see what happens if I change it to a different one. So if I say cursor and I say default grabbing, hand move, no drop. Wow, there's quite a few, to be honest with you. Let's keep it at pointer. Looks like CSS has updated the library as of recently. And in the border radius, I want to be 5 pixels. Okay, so I back over and I refresh this now. There we go. So my pointer's changed as well. So my button is nice and rounded, and instead of just showing a boring old pointer, I've got this hand as I hover over this. Okay, just a bit of slight detail in case you're wondering how to add those kind of features to a website. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to change some sort of transition in my submit button. So submit button again, submit dash btn. Okay, so when hovering over this button, on hovering over this button, you need to change to a different color. Then I want the background color to be set to dark orange. Save, hit back over. If I have a look now, refresh. There we go. Lovely stuff. So we have a couple of things to still do, like our caption that hovers or transitions over our screen. You'll notice that currently as it stands, this is where our caption is sitting. This is not where we want that caption to sit at all. Okay, we want it to float into the screen like we have in the demo that we saw. So let's actually just keep the display up here. So that was called caption something, caption 1. It was called caption 1. So over here it's an ID, so I'm going to say caption dash 1 should have a position of absolute, okay, because it's sitting in a relative container, and I want the top to be at 40% when it transitions in. Okay, I want the left to be at 25% of the viewport, and I want the color to be white because currently it's black. I want the color to be white. I want the font size to be different as well, so I'll say font size 3VW, which is just another unit of measure in CSS. And I'm going to give this an animation name shortly. Let's actually just see what we have so far. So there we go. It's sitting exactly where it needs to sit, but my color is still black for some reason. Let's have a look and see what's going on. So color white here. We need to add our semicolon over there. Let's check it out now. And there we go. It's sitting nicely. But now the issue is it's not transitioning. It's not floating from the top to the bottom like we want it to. So to do that, if you remember correctly, we have to give it an animation. Now, first thing we need to do is give it an animation name so we can reference this name at a later stage. And I'm going to call the name of this animation caption dash fade. Okay, and then below this I'll add an animation duration of 2 seconds. Now it's not going to animate yet because we haven't set the parentheses or the attributes for the animation. To do that, we now need to call the animation. And how do we do that? With keyframes, if you remember correctly. Okay, so the first thing I need to say is at the keyframe, at keyframes of caption dash fade, set this as the parameters. Okay, so we need to remove this. We need only one @ sign. So at 0% of the transition, I want the opacity, which is the visibility, to be 0. Okay, opacity can be anywhere between 0 and 1. It's treated as a unit of 0% to 100%, if you will. Okay, and I also want it to be placed at the top with a value of 0. Okay, then apart from this, at 100% of the animation, right, I want this animation's opacity to be 1, and I also want the top position to be shifted at 40% of the viewport. So let's see what we have so far. Wonderful, now it's actually floating in nicely, and if we revisit that code, we have said this animation that's associated with this caption, these are the parameters I want to set. At 0%, when it's just starting, it needs to have an opacity of 0, it needs to have a top position of 0. At 100%, when the animation is done, I want it to have an opacity of 1 and a top position of 40%. Wonderful stuff. Now we can start working on our featured wrapper, where we've placed all of that code for the products that we've sort of added to our website as well. Okay. Now to start working on our featured wrapper, we first have to call it in our CSS. So we'll say .feature wrapper. Just make sure we get referencing this correctly. So if I back over, our featured wrapper starts over here. So it is featured wrapper. Our featured wrapper starts over here and ends over there at the bottom. So for the parameters over here that I'm going to supply, the first one I'm going to do is position of relative. So I'm going to say position is relative, and I want the display to be that of flex, so we can align these items, the categories, next to each other. I'm going to set overflow to auto so that everything doesn't get crammed together, and I'm going to justify the content to space around again, just like we did with our links earlier. Okay, let's see what we have so far. Refresh. Now our items are sitting next to each other as opposed to beneath each other. Next, I want to go and work on the popular categories. Let's see. So this popular categories title that we have over here, I'm going to edit that so we can center this. Okay. So let's just grab that ID first of all. Let's see, groceries, popcat. Okay, so we don't have an ID for this yet, so we can actually just go and add that in here. So ID pop dash cat. While we're at it, we might as well just grab this, copy that, save this document, very, very important. And then it's an ID, so I'll use the hashtag to reference it. And then the popcat, I'm just going to say text align center. Okay, save that up, right to the bottom. Product container is our next one, and the product container is the product container of each of the categories that we created. So that was a class, so I'll say product dash container, which is this container over here, this container over here, and the third one we have over there, the div containers. Okay, that's what that basically is. And the background color I'm going to set to hashtag 4CA. Here we go. The default one we used earlier. I'm going to set text align to center. I'm going to set the max width that this thing can stretch to 20%, so as not to take up the entire screen. Okay, I'm going to set the position to relative. Now you'll notice a lot of the things that we're doing here are things that we might not have covered, but keep in mind it's just really impossible to cover every single attribute and property in CSS. It's, yeah, like I said, it's nearly impossible. So it's quite important to do a bit of homework on what some of these attributes and elements and properties actually mean. Okay, and then the border style for this item I'm going to set to solid, so I'm going to give it a border. And then the border width I'm going to set to a measly 2 pixels, just that it can pop a bit. And then the margin top of this holder I want to set to 8 pixels. Okay, next I want to go and add an animation to this, and I'm going to set the animation name of this is going to product container anim. Okay, and then I'm going to give it an animation duration of 2 seconds as well, so that it blends in nicely with our previous animation. And the border color, we haven't given it a border color yet, so I'm going to give it a border color of hashtag 4C. Come on, auto populate, where are you? Lovely, there we go. Okay, so let's see what we have so far. It's not going to animate yet though, because we haven't provided it with those parameters. Everything is being offset, but we're getting somewhere, right? The image is overflowing, and that's something we need to sort out pretty soon. We have fixed this up at least. Okay, so now let's go ahead and add that animation that we just created, and to do that again we need to call add keyframes. Just remove this over here. The identifier that it's asking me is the name, which is product container dash anim. Okay, now we need to specify the parameters. So at 0%, we want the opacity to be set to 0, and we want the margin top, okay, to be set to 500 pixels, and that's just going to give it a bit of space so that as it fades in, it's going to, the margin top is going to be set to a different value. Okay, so that's at 0%. So at 100%, I want the opacity to be set to 1, and the margin top to be set to 8 pixels. Okay, let's see if that works out nicely. So let's reload, and still we've got nothing. So I might be missing something here, because my animation should be working. Could just be a syntax error in my code. So product container, that's correct. Let's just copy and paste this so that we have the exact reference. I'll paste this over here. There we go. So it was an error after all. So I didn't spell container correctly. Okay, so let's just get that correct. Now let's head back over, refresh, and there we go. Lovely stuff. So it's transitioning or animating nicely. The next thing I want to move on to is my product container with the images. I want to squeeze those images. I want to get them positioned nicely inside of the container. So product container, but the image is what I'm referencing. Okay, so I'm not referencing the container so much as I'm referencing the actual image inside. Max width, I'm setting that to 100%, so it takes up 100% of its parent viewport. Position is going to be set to relative, and then lastly we want our top to be set to 36 px. Save that up, head back over, and now images are placed nicely. Okay, so we've got a bit of work to do still, and we'll get to it at some point. So the next thing we might want to do is work on the category text. Okay, to do this we can just call the cat text. So cat text, and we'll have a look at what the cat text is. The category text is the text inside of the container. Okay, so that would be fruit and veg, it would be cold meat and so on. So the cat text, I want to set the font size to 1.5 VW. Okay, I want the font weight to be slightly heavier, so that is bold. So font weight, I want this to be bold. I want the color of the text to be white, color white, and I want the margin top so that it's spaced out nicely to be 10%, and then I want the margin bottom to be -2%. Again, we can work with negative values, it is pretty safe. Okay, and then close that off, save it up, and see what we have so far. There we go. So it's spacing out nice. Now we just have to work at the bottom where our button should appear. Okay. So for that, I'm going to go dot btn container. And let's have a look at our index.html to see what that is. So btn container is the div container that houses our button over here. Okay, so btn container. I want the background color to be white as well. Just get the, we always need to make sure that we're closing off with our semicolons here. Okay, that's quite important. Else sometimes our code just does not load up. The position I'm going to set to relative as well. Okay, and then moving on, I'm going to set the top position of it to 1, so that it offsets just slightly. The padding I'll set to 7% all around. So the padding is not just being applied in one direction, it's being applied in all directions. And then the border radius, bottom border, bottom radius, bottom left radius. Okay, and I want the right radius as well, because I don't just want one of the objects to look sleek and clean. So I'll say right, and then I'll say I want a value of 20 pixels here and 20 pixels over here. Okay, refresh. Let's see what we have so far. And there we go, it's coming together nicely. Okay, so we've got some roundness to our edges over here with the borders that we created. Okay, the next thing I want to do is my view more button, which is this over here. Let's actually change this to just btn, just for the sake of keeping it short and sweet. Okay, so this is in my HTML code, view more button. I'm going to change this. This is a class as well. So view more dash btn. I'm going to change the values over here. The background color, first of all, is going to be our popular auto population color that we've been working with here. 5. We got the max width of the button needs to be 100%. 100%. I'm going to set the border to none because I don't want a border around it. I'm going to set the color to white, and then the padding I will set to 7 and 12 pixels. Okay, so again, shorthand property for when it comes to padding. And then text align, I'm going to set to center, and then text decoration I want none, text decoration none, and then after this I want my display to be inline block, which is pretty much the same as inline. There's not much difference, inline block. And then margin I want to set to 9 pixels and 18 pixels. Okay, also using the shorthand property here. And the cursor, again, I want to keep a uniform kind of cursor, so I'm going to make this cursor a pointer cursor. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just add pointer over here, and then lastly a border radius of 5 pixels to make my button, my view more button, nice and smooth. So let's see what we have. So I refresh, here we go. Now this needs to change color when I hover over it, so let's go and apply those changes as well. Okay, but before we even get to that, I think we can start working on our social media links, or maybe we should just do it all in one go. So we'll say again view more button, just copy this. I have a feeling this is going to be a really long tutorial, but okay, it is an assignment, so it's a good thing that we're bringing all of this together, right, as a major project. So the background color I want to change to dark orange when hovering over the button. Let's save, refresh, see what we have, and there we go. The colors changed nicely, beautiful. So a couple of things we still need to do, or the last thing we need to do, is work on our social media links. Okay, and to do this I'm going to grab the social media container first. So I'm going to say hashtag social media dash container, and I'm going to edit the background color to black. I'm going to display the container using the inline block property, and then I'm going to make the position fixed so that it sticks to one spot in the viewport, and then I'm going to make sure that it's to the right at 0. Okay, and then lastly I want the bottom to be at 50% of the viewport. If I save that now, hit back over, refresh, and here we go. There are all of our social media links that was initially hidden before. Okay, so let's go ahead and change a couple of things up here so that we can give it a bit of color pop. We're going to change it according to what the social media platform's color theme actually is. And we'll start off with the Facebook icon. So that's an ID. So Facebook dash icon dash container. The background color is going to be #3. This is the color of Facebook's color scheme 5598. And then when we this is also going to transition. Okay, so when doing some sort of hovering over it, we want this to transition. Something needs to happen, so we'll add a transition property, and we'll say this one should be 0.5 seconds. Save that. If we check it out now, there we go. So it fades in. Okay, you'll see that that fade happens at 0.5 seconds. Now what we want to do is when hovering over this, something also needs to happen. So I'll just grab this container here, copy, and add a pseudo class state of hover. And then when hovering over this, I want the cursor to be a pointer. Let's actually see, I want the padding. I want to set the padding, so maybe we can just add the padding for now. So the padding here would be to the left. So padding left. This is just going to offset it by 20% of its viewport. Okay, so let's see what happens. Okay, so if I hover over that, there we go. You'll see that it's being offset slightly. Okay, great stuff. So what we can also do is we can do the exact same for all the other containers or all the other social media containers. What I also want to do is maybe add a cursor over here. So we'll say the Facebook icon container with a social media container. We want, whenever hovering over any of them, we want there to be a cursor that's visible. Okay, so I'll grab the social media container, not the Facebook one, and I'll paste it just below this curly brace, and I will say social media container on hover. I want my cursor to be of type pointer, not pointer. Save that. Let's refresh and see what we have so far. So now we've got this finger looking thing that's going on here. Wonderful. Okay, now we can work with our Facebook. We've done our Facebook container. We now essentially just need to do our Twitter container as well as our Instagram container. So to do that, I can literally just go and copy and paste this. So I'll copy the Facebook one, I'll paste it over here, and then I'll say for the two that I just copied, I'll say Twitter container. I'm going to have a different color here though. Okay, so the color here is going to be #1CB7EB. Okay, let's see, I'm missing something. The and sign should not be this should be a 7. So Facebook Twitter padding left, everything else looks good, and then this over here also needs to change to Twitter because I'm handling each of these individually. So let's refresh. We've got a Twitter container, great stuff. And now for our very last touch to our website, I just need to change this one to the Insta. So Insta, I'll change this as well while I'm at it, Insta. And the color for my Insta is going to be a completely different color, which is going to be EB4E6D. I'll save that, refresh, and there we go. Wonderful stuff. So we've officially developed our very first website from scratch, a single page website, and it didn't take us more than, let's say, an hour and a half in total for this tutorial. But this is a major project which you can add to your profile to essentially show others that you can develop basic websites. Okay, it also helps with the employability as a web developer. It's always good to practice and create your own projects if you want to just build up your profile, equip yourself with new skills, and just develop your skills as a web developer. Now keep in mind, I will also be making the source code available for all the code that we have in the summary notes, so do be sure to check it out. Now before we wrap things up, let's have a look at what's coming up in our next module. In our next module, we'll start working with JavaScript, otherwise known as JS, the most popular object-oriented programming language of the web. First, we will explore JavaScript by having a brief overview, and then we'll move on to programming in JS. Lastly, we'll explore the use of JavaScript in the web development spectrum and build towards our final project at the end of the course. So I hope to see you there, and I hope to see you for our next lesson, because things are going to get a lot more technical.